Thank you, Risto. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and attend this webinar, where we're going to focus on the part of qualitative research that I think often gets really overlooked, which is the data analysis part. And so we have some wonderful presenters who are generously donating some of their time and their expertise to explain, work that they've done and talk about their process of qualitative data analysis, with the intention of this time together is for people to walk away with, a better sense of what it looks like, sort of concrete on the ground in the data, working through it, rather than more abstract, sort of maybe points of view or paradigms about research. This is more a little bit of nitty gritty with some, I think, maybe theoretical or big ideas thrown in as well. So the plan is to have each of our presenters, talk about their process and their experiences for about 10 to 15 minutes each, and then we'll have time at the end for some questions, some qualitative engagement with what they presented. So we would really love to hear from people who are attending to discuss and have like a nice robust conversation. So please be ready for that after we hear from our presenters. So I'm going to our first presenters are Dr. Kevin Richards and Dr. Michael Hemphill, who are going to talk a little bit.
Thank you so much, Mara. So it's a real pleasure to talk through this today. This is work that goes back to all the way when Michael and I were in grad school, and it's been one of the things that's kept him and I connected throughout our academic careers, which is kind of fun. Much like you just said, Mara, our inspiration for writing this initial article in the figure that I have here is from the original article that was published as a research note in JTPE, was because we found that reading qualitative research manuscripts or papers published in our journals, it was often really difficult to understand exactly what was being done in the qualitative analysis process. People have said before that qualitative research or qualitative data analysis sometimes feels like a black box. And you put the data in and then it pops out, but the process through which that happens is sometimes not really well articulated. Back when I was in grad school, I was working with a professor from the communications department at Purdue who was a quantitative communication scientist. He hadn't done a lot of qualitative research before, but we were going to be collaborating on a project that involved qualitative research. And he really pushed us hard to cleanly and clearly articulate what our qualitative data analysis plan was going to be. And that's where the roots of this qualitative or collaborative qualitative analysis, or what the grad students call CQA, that's where the roots of that comes from. Michael and I have since refined this and used it in a lot of our scholarship. And then back around 2016, 2017, we realized that we were both teaching this to a lot of our graduate students and using it in our individual programs to teach qualitative analysis, but that we didn't have it articulated anywhere in the literature. So we wrote this up as a way to share really what I think is just our approach of approaching qualitative data analysis. I don't know that I think that there's anything incredibly novel or different or unique about this. I think it's just a well-articulated step-by-step guide for how to conduct well-informed thematic analysis. I also think that this approach to analysis is not an end-all be-all, and it's definitely not the right way to approach it in every situation. There are certain theories and perspectives of qualitative research that lend themselves specifically to aligned data analysis techniques and strategies, and some of those might be at odds with how we approach CQA. So I always think it's important to kind of start off by saying that, look, this is not the end all and be all. We're going to kind of skim through this really quickly, and then Michael's going to talk a little bit about how we've applied it and used it. I mentioned that there's this 2018 article in JTPE. There's also a chapter in the qualitative research book that Michael and I co-edited with Paul Wright that overviews this process as well. But we begin with preliminary organization and planning. So team members come together together. We decide upon the theories that we're going to be using, the journals we're going to be targeting, authorship, the research questions that we're going to be analyzing towards, and then develop out a flexible timeline for analysis that serves as a guide from that point through the completion of analysis. During this time, we keep a researcher journal, which serves as an audit trail to guide us from beginning all the way through end. And we then move into open and axial coding, where each member of the research team takes a couple of different transcripts or data sources, however you're conceptualizing them, and analyzes them openly, looking to identify patterns from the data, of course, informed also by theory. For that reason, we typically talk about this analysis as being a combination of inductive and deductive analysis. So we're keeping that researcher journal, identifying emergent themes or recurring patterns in the data. And we're using those eventually to develop a code book, which is the third step here. So we develop this preliminary code book where we take all of those patterns or themes that we've been seeing, cluster them together into categories of themes that can, or of things that can be linked together. So we use the language at this point, categories and codes. Those initial patterns become codes, and then they link into these categories, which are clusterings of kind of aligned codes. That code book also has definitions for each of the codes in space for coding, because when we get to the point where we're pilot testing the code book, we're actually coding into that document so that quotations aligned with each code get dropped right there. During this pilot testing process, we're kind of testing out or evaluating that code book against data that we did not previously code during open and axial coding. That helps us to see where the gaps and the limitations are, and it helps us to continue to refine that process, which kind of introduces and embraces constant comparison as part of the research process. After a few rounds of that pilot testing, we usually do about 3 rounds of pilot testing. Then we get to a point where the code book has been developed, refined, and refined, and then we apply that to all of the data. That usually means going back and coding the data that we had coded during previous phases in analysis, because we have a more well-developed and refined code book now. During that process, we still embrace constant comparison, and some things still change. But we have that code book in place now that's guiding most of the analysis. As at the end of that, we transition from a code book to themes. The process that we do that in is described more in the book chapter than it is in the article. That's been kind of one of the elements of this process that's been emergent for us, and we finally have started to wrap our minds around it a little bit over the last couple of years. But in short, the categories turn into themes, and the codes essentially become components of those themes, or sometimes sub-themes if we're using themes with aligned sub-themes. As you can see at the bottom of that model, we also embrace many of the traditional approaches for trustworthiness, peer debriefing, researcher, and data triangulation, that audit trail, search for negative cases. And that's not an all-inclusive list, and every project is going to be a little bit different. So you're not going to have data triangulation, for example, if you only have one data source. So I don't want those things to feel as if they're set in stone. Michael?
Thanks, Kevin, for a quick and really good overview of the article. It's now turned into a book chapter, as you mentioned. I just want to mention a few things, and I think we're sticking to 10, 11 minutes, so we'll be relatively brief, and look forward to taking some questions. So I think this process is almost always supported by some sort of software technology, in vivo, Atlas TI, and that sort of thing. And one of the things that I find helpful is that it's a systematic process, and there can be accountability mechanisms kind of overlaid into this. And so when I'm working with Kevin, anybody that knows Kevin and I would get on well, but we have different organizational skills, different ways that we approach our work. And so this is the type of thing that can kind of bring us together and put us on the same page. A couple of things that we've seen for this approach is that it can be useful when managing large sets of data, or overseeing a large team of researchers, which I think is where this initially came from. Kevin wrote about that in our chapter. But now Kevin's a good example of someone overseeing a research lab where there's multiple studies going on, multiple teams of researchers. And I know Kevin remains very involved in that, but he can't be in the weeds of every single study. And so this process provides a sort of systematic process for the students to follow and some accountability mechanisms to say, what stage are you at in this process? Kevin or whoever's overseeing it can go in and kind of look at that and give some feedback and make sure things are following the process as prescribed. Similarly, I work with a lot of doctoral students here at UNC Greensboro in our PhD and our EDD programs. And some of the students in that program are going to be doing more independent research. They're collecting their data on their topic of interest, but they also need some oversight from myself as their dissertation chair, perhaps their committee members. And so several of our students, they've been through qualitative classes and things like that. We don't prescribe this approach to them, but they're often looking for something like this that's a little bit more tangible and practical and gives them some steps to follow. And then it sets me up as a peer debriefer at each stage. And so the students aren't necessarily collaborating with me, as this article sort of describes, but instead they're going through this independently, but engaging me at each of those stages, or most of those stages, as a peer debriefer, and chairperson of their dissertation process. The final point I mentioned that a little bit surprising for Kevin and I is that this seems to get a lot of traction across fields beyond physical education. So we get a lot of citations, according to Google Scholar, in dissertations. I've seen them in, library and information sciences, engineering, business types of publications, and things like that, who I speculate are in that same sort of place where they're reading really good information about qualitative research. They're well-trained, but then they get a hold of a bunch of data and they're just not sure what the next step is to do that analysis process. And then this prescribes a few steps that can help get you going. So I think that puts us right at about 10 minutes. I know we invite some questions, but also look forward to hearing from colleagues. So I'll stop there. And thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks. Sorry. Thank you, Kevin and Richard. That was Michael. Sorry. That was awesome. Let's see. Does anyone have a question right off the top while we're transitioning to the next person? I know I said we'd go at the end, but then I was thinking it's sometimes helpful to, right after a presentation if people have something they want to know.
So I have a quick question. I don't know if you said it here or just before we started recording, but you said that this is a form of thematic analysis. When you are doing this, is it rooted in like somebody else's work and then you just put the qualitative portion of it? Or when you would describe it in a paper, would you say a form of thematic analysis, collaborative qualitative analysis, Richards, Hemphill, 2018?
So I think I would really view it as one approach that adopts and integrates a lot of standard, albeit and acknowledged, traditional approaches to qualitative research. So we cite Patton, we cite Lincoln and Guba. I think it's Braun and Clark who have a seminal piece on thematic analysis. Like we get into the qualitative more qualitative philosophical literature related to not looking at intercoder reliability when we construct themes and instead rely on the development of a quality code book. So I think we reference those things. I don't know if I would say that it's a one way of doing thematic analysis. Perhaps you could. And I didn't really get into this in the overview actually, but as Michael alluded to, this was really developed initially for group environments when we're analyzing qualitative data as a team. But Michael's illustration also gets at the fact that this is a highly adaptable model. We're not gatekeeping this. I think justifiable variability in the way that people do qualitative analysis is essential. We put this out there as just a process, as an approach. We ground it in the literature and invite others to take it, use it, and make it their own.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to the next presenter. And if people do have questions, I actually have something I want to talk about or ask, but we'll wait till the end. So let's go now to, I believe Ping was the second presenter. Dr. Zio.
Cool.
Yeah.
Can I share my screen here?
Kevin, if you can unshare, and then Ping can share. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate that.
Thank you. And all right, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Yes, we can. Looks great.
Brief introduce myself. My name is PingFan. Go by Ping. Currently assistant professor in the physical education department at St. Collins. So I'm very happy to be here to share some strategies about qualitative analysis. Little bit background information. So usually when the majority of my studies, I do qualitative research methods. So some data I collect, like interviews, photos, observations, journals, and artifacts. So the common approaches or commonly I use those strategies for data analysis, like open Excel coding, thematic analysis, inductive and deductive analysis. So let me quickly show you an example how I analyze qualitative data. This is one of my studies. The topic is the teacher socialization in physical education, a critical incident technique approach. So the purpose of this study is to understand the teacher socialization process in physical education, because the topic is about teacher socialization, that I use occupational socialization theory as a theoretical framework to guide this study. The reason I would like to introduce the context information here is because those are related to data analysis process. I use this theoretical framework to guide data analysis and data collection. And so I recruited 2 participants, physical education teachers, as participants in this study. And then I analyze data separately to see their teacher socialization process. Some data I collected are, I had 2 meetings with each individual participant, and during the first meeting, I collected semi-structured interviews and critical incident timelines. During second meeting, I collected follow-up interviews. And so, as I mentioned, it's like a deductive analysis because I follow the 3 phases of occupational socialization theory. So I just break it down. And I would like to compare Jaden is one participant's experiences versus the second participant's experiences. So that's why I separate 2 participants and analyze their data. And I did open and Excel coding and thematic analysis to analyze the interview data and critical incident timeline. So I feel like for me, I really start data analysis when I was collecting data. So when I collect data, do the interview and collect the critical incident timelines, I started data analysis and I have the initial impressions about the data for this study. And then when I formally started open coding, and I would print it out. So that is interview responses, and I add line numbers and print it out and read it and just get sense of the data. And for the second time, I read the responses, interview data, and I will highlight the phrases or sentences related to research purpose or research questions, and wrote down codes in the margins. So that is the open coding process. And same thing, I did open coding process for critical incident timeline. So basically, the critical incidents are the codes for my open coding. So that is the open coding process. And because all those are written, are on hard copy, so I collected those codes in Word file. And as I mentioned, I follow the 3 phases of occupational socialization theory. So I have 3 phases for the codes. Phase 1, phase 2 right here, and phase number 3. Under each phase, I kind of just put all the codes together from interview number 1, interview number 2, and critical instance. So in the brackets here, I label J1 means Jaden, and 1 means interview number 1, and I add line numbers here. So just in case later on I want to go back and pull out the quotes, so I can go back to the transcripts and pull out the quotes when I'm writing the results. So that's why I label like what is this code come from. So that is my open coding process. And next step, I did Excel coding. So I have all the codes here, and I went through all the codes, and then I merge the codes with the same or similar meanings together, create patterns or categories for each phase and for each participant. So some examples here, like the PET training phase, and coach or PET faculty, or peers or parents or quality cooperating teachers. Those are critical instances or factors that impact their Jaden's socialization process. So this is a process for Excel coding. And the last step is to generate themes. So I have all the categories or patterns here, and then I generate themes for Jaden and for each phase. So phase 1, phase 2, and phase number 3. So for example, phase number 2, those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 10, 11, 12, I have 12 categories here. And then I merge number 2, coach, peer faculty, peers, parents, cooperating teachers together as a theme, which is influential agents. And the same thing for the second theme is coursework. So I combine PET courses, field experiences, and other preps in PET program together, and to generate the second theme, which is the coursework. So that is the way I do for data analysis for Jaden's teacher socialization process. And then I did the same thing for the other participants. And then that is for results. That's how I present my results based on the occupational socialization theory. I have 3 based on my personal experiences, I have 3 tips. So when we are coding the data or doing the analysis, we're gonna keep the purpose of research or research questions in mind. We're gonna pull out the data or the information or the phrases or the paragraph or maybe the sentences related to the purpose of the study or research questions, and then make codes. And second is like theoretical framework. is the theory to guide data collection and data analysis. Maybe that's the way you're gonna present results. Last tip is implement a backward design approach. Is like after data collection, I have some sense or initial impressions about my data, and then I have some ideas like how am I gonna present the results? Am I going to compare this case and that case or not? And then if yes, I'm gonna compare. And then when I code doing the coding, code the data, I will label like participant number 1 and participant number 2, that I can compare the codes from participant number 1 and participant number 2. So that's the 3 tips. Last thing is I would like to share a software I use a lot. It saves my time a lot. So MaxQDA is the software I use a lot right now. This is a example, not for a teacher socialization study, but for another study is principles, perceptions of physical education. So basically, I doing open and Excel coding here, and just highlights the phrases or sentences and make codes right here. And all the codes are here. The good thing about this software is I can drag down and up to make categories. So all the codes right here, A means school A, C means school C, B means school B. When I was coding the data, I mean, just in case, I'm not sure if I'm gonna compare, so I kind of label A, B, C. But those are all the codes, and then I just drag the codes with similar meanings together and make categories or subcategories like standards, and then make big categories is like impact our PL students or quality of physical education. So that's a big category. So another benefit for this software is I can see how many quotes I have. So basically, I have 36 quotes regarding quality physical education. And then I can double click on it and I can see all the quotes. So when I wrap up the manuscript, I can go back to all the quotes and pull out some high quality quotes for my results section. So basically, that's my some tips, ideas, and insights.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Fan. That was really, I think, a great example of keeping the theoretical framework in mind as part of the way that you did the analysis. That part was really clear. And I have some thought or questions about the software, but I'll hold them and see if other people have questions right now for Dr. Fan in the chat, or just, go ahead and ask.
And feel free to call me Ping. That's fine.
Okay. Thanks.
So Ping, have you used other qualitative software other than the one you demonstrated? And is there a reason why you choose to use this one over others?
Yes, I tried Unvivo and Deduce, those 2 softwares before. And this is the 3rd software I tried. So I feel like this one is easy to navigate and to organize. It's very clear. So that's why I prefer using MaxQDA.
Ping, would you mind when I move on, to type the name of the software into the chat? We have a request for the name of it, which is great because good for people to have those specifics. There it is. MaxQDA.
Yeah.
Excellent. And actually, my question related to how did you become familiar with learning this software? Was that something like your institution supported in terms of like learning it and also licensing it?
The reason I started using this software is during my dissertation, there are a lot of interviews, transcripts, and just not easy to analyze the data using the traditional the manually coding data. So I feel like I need this software. They do have videos, tutorial videos. So I just learn by myself, watch all the videos, and then try it out.
Excellent. Yeah, it is definitely, I think there's some learning, there's like a learning curve and some time investment into learning these like computer online qualitative analyses programmed, but then it can save you time in the long run, especially when you have a big data set.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. I mean, if you just 2 or 3 transcripts or interviews, that's fine. I can do the traditional way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have like around 32 participants, so I have a lot of interviews. So the traditional way, it's just takes time and not easy to organize.
Yeah, I have been there for sure. I still have like the hard copy binder. I have like 8, 3-ring binders from my dissertation in my office that could have been put into a coding program. Maybe that might have saved me a lot of paper. All right, thank you so much. I want to make sure we have time for our last presenter, and then we'll come back together. And if there's other questions, we'll hold them till afterwards. So like to turn it over now to Justin, Dr. Haegele.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's nice to meet some AERA folk, not a group that I've interacted with before, but some familiar faces in here, which is nice. I think it's cool to see how everybody approached this topic a bit differently. So I'll just share how I approached it, and I started with thinking more about the type of work that we're interested here in at ODU and within our center, and then how we've used some interpretative work to approach that work. And so let's see if PowerPoint is going to work for me today. Are you all able to see the PowerPoint slides as they skip? Perfect. So one of the things that we've done here at ODU, and we've worked on quite a bit with a few colleagues internationally, is talk about inclusion in a way that's a bit different than what's been traditionally used within at least the US context. And so a lot of times inclusion is just discussed as a placement, a space where people with and without disabilities, or even more recently, a space where a variety of people are just exist within the same space. And so what we've done recently in one paper with Anthony Marr from the UK kind of unpacks all of this, is we've tried to conceptualize inclusion as intersubjective experiences that are really rooted in a sense of belonging, acceptance, and value. And this is important for me to share before we can get into any of the data analysis or the research approach stuff, because of what that means for collecting data, right? And so if we're talking about inclusion as a feeling or an intersubjective experience, we can't look at a space and make assumptions as an objective observer that somebody feels included, right? So we have to speak to people about their own lived, embodied perspectives about their experiences within spaces or places. And so I work from a physical education for people with disability or for disabled people lens. I do think this has application across various populations, but some of the important key points here are that, like, placing people in the same context doesn't suggest or guarantee that people will feel accepted, a sense of belonging, or a sense of value. In fact, most of the research we do shows that it's the opposite. But by believing inclusion is intersubjective experiences, we're placing value in what people are saying about their experiences rather than just making assumptions about them. And it allows us to problematize a lot of different things, like integrated settings, like inclusive strategies, or the inclusion mission statement at our universities, all these fun things where the word inclusion is thrown around, and we get to problematize whether or not those spaces, places, strategies, and so on and so forth actually elicit feelings of inclusion. And so I share all that to get to IPA. And so I am not smart enough myself to develop research approaches or data analysis. And my training is not in qualitative work from my doctoral program, but about a decade ago, once we started thinking about inclusion as intersubjective experiences and a need to speak with disabled students about their experiences, I started reading and trying to learn and self-teaching and trial by error various qualitative methods. And one that I found to be very helpful for me as a beginner researcher was IPA, which is a product of Jonathan Smith and some of his friends. And I have one of the books in my hand that I have relied on quite a bit to guide some of this work. And what's ended up happening over the years is that first learning this method, which I believe is like a recipe or a cookie cutter method toward phenomenological work, which was really helpful, has now allowed us to become more flexible in our work after that. And so I wanted to introduce IPA for those of you who haven't used it or heard of it. It's a qualitative approach centering on lived and embodied experiences and a person's relationship with the world. And it's really concerned with not only the person's experiences in the world, but also the way in which they make sense of those experiences in the world. And so that's the two aims really for the researcher is first to understand and describe what the world is like for the participant, and then second, what that means, what those experiences mean for the participant. So for us, it's not just what happens within PE for disabled children, it's also what meaning are those disabled children ascribing to those experiences within PE settings. I'm definitely going to be right under 10 minutes, by the way, because, being from New York, I try to be efficient. Anyway, so three theoretical routes to IPA. One is phenomenology, which is that centering on lived embodied experiences. And second is, and this word, I'm not sure if anybody knows how to say it correctly, but I certainly don't, is hermeneutics. And IPA has a double hermeneutic cycle where you as the researcher are interpreting the participant's interpretation of the meaning of their own experiences. And then it's ideographic, where it situates each participant within that particular context. And this is really important for data analysis reasons with IPA. So one of the unique particularities of IPA, and this is just the simple breakdown for what Smith recommends in his book for data analysis with IPA research. But one of the unique particularities, I believe, is that it starts at the case level. And so the first three steps of data analysis happens at the case level to center the individual and their unique environment or context and the meaning that they make of their experiences. And then there's a shift toward constant comparison across participants. So that's one of the things when we talk to our doctoral students here, one of the unique particularities that we drive home is that the first thing you want to do is develop themes at the case level and then compare across case levels, which is a little departure from some other data analyses where you are developing themes across participants off the bat. A couple of other things that as we've moved beyond or past IPA, we generally, when we're talking with disabled people about their experiences, we're coming from a subjective epistemology where we're, as the researchers, part of the research process, we're interpreting the data from our own positions. And so our own thinking is involved with the data analysis process. So we don't, at least the work we're doing here, usually we have one data analyst, and that analyst is being very explicit in our data analysis section and positionality section about who they are and the ways in which their embodied experiences themselves might influence the interpretation of the child's data. So that's a little departure from some of like the more positivist or post-positivist qualitative data analysis procedures out there. We use critical friends more so to push analysis and to question the analysis of the analyst rather than to like confirm themes or come to some sort of group agreement. I really liked what Kevin and Richard said earlier, where he said, or they said, that there's a lot of different ways to analyze data and there's no really right reason or wrong reason. And I think him and I have had conversations about some of these differences. And this is just the way that we've adopted for like the type of research that we're interested in out here. So I definitely came in under 10 minutes, but that's all I got for you.
Thank you, Justin. I mean, that leaves us with more time for discussion, and there's lots of questions in the chat. I just also want to thank you for presenting. This is, I think, a different way of approaching qualitative analysis than we usually see. And for me, even just to see that laid out, like I was like, oh, that's sort of what I do. But I don't know if I actually had ever been introduced to that framework and the way that you termed it. And I often find myself like writing about my own research processes, the data analysis, that kind of thing, in a more sort of clinical way. And what you just described really hit home for me. So I really appreciate that. And I imagine it's not just me who's experiencing that. So thank you. That was excellent. Questions directly for Justin right at this moment, directly after his presentation. I know there's questions, a general, like some chatter in the chat that we'll get to, but I just wanted to give some space for his ideas right now.
So do you get a lot of pushback on, obviously you can cite where this IPA is coming from, but like, do you have a lot of pushback on only having one data analyst, like that, not having multiple people looking at it? And I think on one of your slides, you said that you do use critical friends, but they're not there to confirm your findings. They're pushing the conversation forward. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Do you mean from reviewers?
Yeah.
I think it depends on where you write for and who you're submitting to. So like with journals like Sport Education and Society that have more of a sociology lean toward it, or like Disability and Society, which has more of a sociology lean toward it, this is fairly common. But I think if we were trying to put something like this in RQES, which would be, I think, probably on the positivist side of our field, I think that we'd probably run across a lot more issue. I think it depends on the reviewers. I think if you're explicit about your assumptions, right? Like I had mentioned, like the subjective epistemology or coming from an interpretative approach. I think people understand that we're not looking for, the answer. We're just looking to represent an answer. And, I think with that, as long as reviewers are savvy, which a lot of them are, then we usually do all right. Maybe not.
Plus, there is something.
Sorry, I have to shoot the dig over at him, there it is. It's in the chat too.
But also, like, part of what you're saying is that, which I really appreciate, was like you illustrated the point that this is like a researcher interpreting meaning making lived experience, like, of a participant's interpretation. So there's almost like a meta interpretation that comes with this type of analysis. Is that right? Like, does that sort of,
Yeah.
so it makes sense that even only having one analyst would be okay as long as you're very upfront in the description of the data analysis section that, like, yeah, here I am as this person with these positionality points, and this is my interpretation of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the more explicit we are about what we're trying to do, whether it's like the epistemological stance or the research purpose even, or research questions, because we're not saying, so like we've spoken to a lot of blind or visually impaired people over the last decade about their experiences, and we're not telling people that all blind people must experience this. We're saying like the particular people who we've spoken to have experienced X, Y, and Z, and this is our interpretation of what they said. So a lot of it has to do with the way in which we write, I think, as well, and the type of claims that we make. And, with the journals that I work with, a lot of the times it's the way we write and not necessarily what we write that is more problematic.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Other questions for Dr. Haegele, Justin?
Yeah, Justin's good.
Okay, well, we have some really great questions in the chat, so I'm gonna work through them, but open them up to all of our presenters, and just see what people, have in mind. So I see two sort of separate but related questions about um, you know, artificial intelligence, AI, and whether this should be used to analyze qualitative data. That ChatGPT has launched a data analysis software, um, or just, the interaction of software and like non-specific or specific non-qualitative AI. So any thoughts from anyone about the use of artificial intelligence when it comes to qualitative data analysis? And this may be so new that none of you may have experience with this, but it's worth a conversation.
So we talked about this, I think, on an episode of Risto's podcast a little bit, but I think that this is kind of the way that things will inevitably track. I think that we will at some point have qualitative data analysis software that incorporates AI and helps to identify and extract themes. I think that you could even see a situation in which these softwares could be customized, meaning that you could feed it with articles related to theories that you're using, and then ask it to analyze the data through the lens of that theory, or using different, thematic versus narrative analysis, all these different approaches that we're talking about. I think that there could be a day where qualitative research, because of AI, begins to more resemble quantitative research. I think that there are some problems with that and some challenges with that that'll need to be navigated. I also think that when the first quantitative data analysis software package came out, people probably didn't love it either. But that's progress, and that's how things move. I think we'll need to find ways to use it responsibly and ethically.
So Kevin and Justin, as two editors at journals, would you accept a submission that said, let's say I submit a qualitative research paper to one of your journals and say, I used ChatGPT as a critical friend, or I used the data analysis through ChatGPT to analyze my data, and then I went back and confirmed those results, me being a critical friend of ChatGPT? Is that a desk reject, or is that a, hey, let's send it out to our associate editor and figure out if they want to send it out and see what happens? Where are we at with that?
I've been asking HK to give us an update on their policy related to AI in publishing for quite some time. They haven't given us any stance on it yet. We've wanted to, at JTPE, articulate some kind of a statement to at least say, for example, at minimal, the use of GPT or generative AI needs to be acknowledged. The best I think we've done is JTPE published a kind of a special editorial a couple of years ago that addresses the use of AI across the different roles that we perform as academics. And talks a little bit about the possibilities and pitfalls for use of AI in publishing. But I wish somebody would do that, because that would force HK to take a stance and figure out how they want to respond.
I think it would be a really cool study to actually analyze, like get all the qualitative data and analyze it and come up with your themes and your codes and whatever, and then run it through something like that and see what the differences or the alignment was.
I think that's a fantastic idea, Peter. After you finish doing that, please send it to JTPE.
Well, I've got some stuff coming up, so we can play around with it.
To piggyback on that question, like we've done the same thing from APAC with HK, and I've also talked to Routledge from Quest to see what's going on, but nobody seems to want to make the first move as far as a publisher making a stance. I think that going back to like, would this be a desk reject? I think it largely depends on what the purpose and epistemological stance and research questions are. So like coming from an interpretative lens, it doesn't seem to make too much sense to use AI, because you'd still need a person to be interpreting who has a specific positionality within the world and then be able to make those statements. I would say that this is probably going to be less of an issue in sociology informed fields or education fields, and probably more of a problem in like hard positivist fields that are collecting huge chunks of like open-ended question data that want to very quickly generate answers to whatever their research questions might be. And so I think it'll take quite a while for it to infiltrate us. But I mean, that just might be my own ignorance toward the issue.
All of these are good points. I definitely myself sort of run far away from AI, so I don't know what, there's obviously no specific answer, but definitely worth considering, because it sounds like it is going to enter our general lexicon and part of our research world, and so we have to really grapple and wrestle with it. I want to make sure we have some other great questions in the chat, and I want to make sure we can address some of them. So here's a question for the presenters from Anchi Dang. I'm wondering whether the qualitative analyses can be applied to capture preliminary outcomes for interventions from baseline to endpoint by using the same interview questions. I'm going to re-put it in the chat so you can read it, just because it's a little bit of a longer question. Does anyone have a response to Anchi's great question? Thank you.
So I do see this quite often in our field, where people are using qualitative data to answer questions and interventions. I suppose one question I would have, especially if this is talking about preliminary data or like support data, would be, is there a purpose to having baseline data, or could somebody reflect on their entire experience throughout an intervention process during a post-intervention like interview protocol? And that's something that I've challenged some of our authors before on, because I'm not sure that you'd be able to very clearly identify changes from pre to post questions. I think that would be a challenge with the data analysis. But I do think that you can have people reflect on their experiences throughout the interview or intervention process. So that's just one opinion.
I guess like in this case, because it's intervention study, maybe like mixed methods could be a good option. Is pre-test and post-test, and do interview the beginning and do the interview at the end, so that you have both sets of data, quant and qual, so you can see the difference. I guess it's for data analysis, it will be hard to define the changes in terms of qualitative data.
What we found for interventions is, instead of interviews, get the kids to draw, and you look at the changes or the similarities in their drawings as you go through a particular time period. One of them we did with the sport ed, we did them 6 times, I think it was. And you gradually saw the complete disappearance of the teacher out of the drawings as it went on, because the students became more independent. So rather than having to worry about your questions and keeping them the same or deriving them differently on the section, just get them to draw what's the most important thing to them at this particular time, and then boom, you've got it. And then you, of course, have to do little interviews about what's in the drawing and, you know, who's represented, etc. But there's a standard for that. Mara Simon can tell you more about that when it comes out.
I was gonna say that yes, you'd be able to read more in-depthly about this method in the qualitative methods special issue of the JTPE, which will be out at the end of the year, hopefully. But that's a great suggestion as well. Thank you, Dr. Hasty. Justin, Martin asked if you have specific research articles that use IPA for reference, and I thought maybe if you had like the titles or links, you could just pop those into the chat rather than like say them in the discussion. That seems like a little bit easier to send the links. Would that be okay?
Or I was just going to add to Anji's question. Yeah, I know her, so it's good to hear from Anji. Any of research around sort of students' knowledge development, cognitive development might lend itself to that. I know, Dr. Chen's lab, who she worked with, has done some work on the way students understand, fitness and think about physical activity and motivation. And so oftentimes if we're asking students questions about things like that before an intervention process, you might get simplistic answers. They may not be very well aware of those concepts. And you could certainly imagine that a post-intervention questionnaire would illustrate that the students have some sophisticated knowledge and can speak about things with a level of interest or passion or disinterest or dispassion or what have you. So, it's about the research question, I think, that drives what makes sense here. And a lot of qualitative research has been about the way students experience things instead of like their change over time. But, certainly being familiar with some of your research interests, I think that your proposed idea can make sense. It would take some thought on how you frame that and situate it in your research process.
Thank you, Michael. It is great to see you. I mean, yeah.
Okay. We have thank you, Angie. We have a question from Young Jin, grad student. I'm glad that you were, brave enough to ask a question. That's excellent. I know that perhaps one of our presenters may have to leave right at 4. We'll stay on for a little longer. We have actually a real wealth of qualitative experience on the call from all our attendees. So anybody can feel free to jump in and help and answer this question, which is a great one. Youngjin writes that my question to all the presenters is that the process when codes evolve to a theme. After reading and coding data, there could be a good number of codes. When I tried to combine codes with themes, I felt like codes lost some meanings and characteristics. How do you address this? And so I'm going to put that question again in the chat so our presenters can read it. But anyone have thoughts about that?
I can maybe just venture a couple of quick thoughts, and then I have to hop off in just a minute. This has been one of the biggest challenges for me throughout much of my career, understanding that evolution of going from a code book to themes. I think in the book chapter related to CQA, we articulated, I think, a bit better how that happens. Our code book is organized into categories with codes, and categories are kind of superordinate and encompass similar codes or codes that can be linked together in some way. When we transition to themes, I think what happens is that the categories become themes, and then the codes either become sub-themes or component parts of that broader theme. What we end up having to do in some cases is split into multiple papers if we have too many themes. Like if we have a very large data set and we end up with a series of, let's say, 8 solid defensible themes that are well grounded in data, that's too much to present in a single paper. And so sometimes we'll find ways to cluster those 8 themes together into 2 groups of 4 themes, let's say. And then you have 2 groups of 4 themes that are independent of each other enough in that they're linked together and can stand on their own in independent publications. Sometimes, however, we end up not publishing all of the themes that we end up with. There are multiple times where I can remember having 1 or 2 themes that just didn't really fit, and we felt like it was important, but it didn't really cluster together in a meaningful way with the rest of what we had to say, and we left it out. So, I think that it's a range of different approaches that people use for this. I think that this is part of the art that's involved in qualitative research as well, where we as the researcher play a very important role in making these types of decisions. One of those reasons why, I also hope that there is always a human element to qualitative analysis. So apologies, I do have to hop off, but thank you so much, Mara and everybody, for inviting me on. Have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, Kevin. Anyone else of the presenters or the attendees have thoughts on Youngjin's question?
I can share my experiences. I have similar experiences before. Is the quotes is perfect, fantastic. I would like to use quotes or codes in my manuscript or in the paper. But again, like I sometimes ask myself is are those codes or quote, especially like the quotes are highly related to research questions or the purpose of the study. I guess at the end we would like to address the research question or the purpose of the study. That's most of cases, like I do have some beautiful, amazing quotes, data there, but some data or quotes are not highly related to research question. So I had that similar experiences before. I just feel like I guess as I mentioned in the slides, like keep research question and the purpose of the study in mind throughout data analysis process.
Yeah, that's a really, really important point, right? We always keep the research question at the forefront, and that helps guide the decisions about, how to group the codes into themes or categories. Sometimes I will do it like the opposite, where I have, larger themes in mind, and then I'm looking to bring the codes in, under the specific theme. So that's another thing to think about. Anyone else would like to address Youngjin's question, or have any other questions for our presenters or the audience in general?
Yeah, I had a question that I asked earlier before we started recording, but since everybody's present, so I was talking to a colleague who I'm looking to collaborate with, and we were talking about, how to analyze the data once we go through and interview a bunch of people and have all this data. And she was saying that they don't do a lot of qualitative coding. They do a lot of she said, a phenomenological approach, and they're moving to post-qualitative methods. So is somebody familiar with that in a way that they could explain to me why you would use that versus like literally every single paper I use Richards and Hemphill qualitative collaborative coding because it's so easy to fit into my analysis. But does anybody have any information on post-qualitative and why you would use it?
That's a great question. I don't, so I'm curious to hear if others do.
I'm just waiting for Justin to unmute his microphone. Are you? No?
I've read a bit on post-qual. I think post-qual is really interesting stuff, but I don't have the requisite experience to speak with any actual use. I think there are people who do really interesting stuff that fall closer to that realm. Like there's a gentleman named Javier Monteforte who's in Valencia, Spain, who does really interesting work in that area. I read a lot of Brett Smith's work because he does a lot of interesting methodological stuff with qualitative work. So, there's a lot of good people to read their stuff. But I'm not one of those people with post-qual.
Is IPA then on the way to that? Or because I feel like qualitative coding that we've talked about, that the two other groups that presented were very straightforward. I can wrap my head around those types of coding, categorizing versus what you presented. Is that more towards that post-qualitative?
I think IPA has a pretty solid structure where I started with IPA, but the stuff we've been doing more recently with, you know, using reflexive thematic analysis, like from Braun and Clark, and it's a little more flexible. We're not as structured. I mean, that's saying the same thing twice, isn't it? We've also like used like our thematic development to write nonfiction narratives depicting data rather than just showing the thematic development and, you know, typical themes, theme presentation. So there are some unique elements, but I think post-qual is another step that I haven't had the time to get into quite yet, like post-qual, post-humanism, these wonderful ideas that are coming, and I think hopefully infiltrating our field pretty soon. I'm excited to learn more about that stuff, but I don't, again, think that I have the experience to speak on it.
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. Definitely, I want to check it out too. So a huge thank you from Risto and I and the rest of the AERA exec board to our presenters for taking the time to share their expertise. I hope that, you know, if you attended, you walk away with at least a few ideas about what data analysis might look like within the qualitative paradigm. And really just thank you all for being here and engaging. Great questions. Great to see, you know, many of you virtually. And we hope that many of you can attend AERA in 2 weeks. And if not, consider AERA 2025 because that cycle starts right up again. And as you heard me mention, look for the qualitative JTPE special issue. Anything I forgot, Risto?
I think you got it all. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.